I usually don't ask this early, but if you could like the video and subscribe, it would mean a lot. We're so close to hitting 10,000 subscribers, and your support can really help get my content out there. Thanks. Marc Desjardins, 38. A Canadian-born tech entrepreneur from Montreal, Quebec. Marc built his small tech business from the ground up, balancing the demands of his career with his dedication to his family. He's known for his resilience, kindness, and loyalty, traits that define him as a father and a husband, but his trust is shaken to the core when the life he knew starts unraveling. Sophie Tremblay, 36. Sophisticated, beautiful, and magnetic, Sophie is originally from Trois-Rivières, Quebec. She and Marc met during their university years and quickly became an inseparable couple. While Sophie appeared to be a perfect wife and loving mother, a darker, hidden side of her emerges that will ultimately change everything. Olivier Desjardins, 8. Marc and Sophie's oldest child, Olivier, is intelligent and curious, always asking questions and craving knowledge. His attachment to his father runs deep, making the eventual revelations about his paternity all the more heartbreaking. Amélie Desjardins, 5. Marc and Sophie's youngest daughter, Amélie, is full of energy and joy, lighting up every room she enters. Marc adores her, and she becomes his lifeline through the difficult times ahead. Éric Martel, 40. A successful architect from Quebec City, Éric had a brief relationship with Sophie long before Marc came into her life. He plays a key role in the shocking revelations that will turn Marc's world upside down. For years, my life was something out of a fairy tale. I had a successful business, a beautiful home, 2 incredible kids, and Sophie, my loving wife, by my side. We had built a life together that seemed perfect to everyone around us. Friends and family admired us, calling us the ideal couple. If only they knew how wrong they were. Sophie and I met in our early 20s at McGill University. She was studying literature. I was deep into computer science. Our worlds were different, but somehow we clicked. I fell in love with her the moment she laughed at one of my terrible jokes. Her smile could light up the darkest room, and I was captivated by her intelligence and charm. Within a year of dating, I proposed. We were married a few months later in a beautiful ceremony by the Saint. Lawrence River, surrounded by friends, family, and a lot of love. A few years later, Olivier was born, and then Amélie. Life couldn't have been more perfect. Or so I thought. Looking back, the first sign that something was wrong came about a year before she left. Sophie started changing. At first, it was subtle. Her eyes would glaze over during dinner conversations, or she'd spend longer hours at the gym. I tried to rationalize it. I thought it was the stress of motherhood or maybe her feeling unfulfilled in her own life. We both had demanding careers, me in tech, her in education, and raising 2 kids wasn't easy. I blamed myself for not noticing sooner. 6 months ago, Sophie's distance became undeniable. She started staying out late, saying she was meeting old friends or attending work functions. Sometimes, she wouldn't even bother to come home at all, crashing at a friend's place overnight. My gut told me something was wrong, but I pushed those feelings aside, hoping it was just a phase. I had no proof, and I didn't want to be that guy, the suspicious husband who ruins everything with his paranoia. Then, one day, I came home to an empty house. No note, no call, just silence. I walked through each room, calling Sophie's name, my voice echoing off the walls. The kids' rooms were empty too. It felt like my world had been ripped out from under me. A few hours later, I found a note on the kitchen counter, hastily written on a scrap of paper. I need space. The kids and I are going to Sweden for a while. Don't try to follow us. Sweden? Why Sweden? My head swirled with questions I didn't have answers to. She had never mentioned Sweden before. As I stood there in disbelief, the phone rang. It was her. Her voice was calm, almost emotionless, as she explained that she was staying with a friend in Stockholm and that she needed time to figure things out. That was the last real conversation we had. I was left alone in our empty home, wondering how my life had fallen apart so quickly. For weeks, I was paralyzed by anger, heartbreak, and confusion. I had no idea what to do. She had taken my children, our children, and fled across the world. I had lost the two most important people in my life overnight. I began contacting lawyers, but international custody battles are complicated, especially when one parent has fled to a foreign country. For the first time in my life, I felt truly powerless. But as time went on, that powerlessness turned into something else, something darker. I wanted revenge. It wasn't just about getting my kids back anymore. It was about making Sophie pay for what she had done to me, to our family. I needed her to face the consequences of her actions. I needed to win. I spent weeks plotting. I knew that Sophie was living with a friend in Sweden and had no intention of returning to Canada anytime soon. But there was one thing I had up my sleeve: our legal marriage. Despite her running off to Sweden, Sophie was still legally bound to Canadian laws, and I used that to my advantage. Through my lawyer, I filed a legal case in Canada. I claimed that if she didn't return within 60 days for a court hearing, she would forfeit custody of the children. The claim was largely fabricated, but it was enough to make Sophie panic. The moment she received the summons, she called me in a fury, demanding to know what I was trying to pull. I kept my voice calm and steady, telling her this was the legal system at work, and if she didn't come back, she'd lose everything. After days of heated exchanges, she finally relented. She agreed to come back to Canada with the kids. Little did she know I had one more trick up my sleeve, something she would never expect. When Sophie landed back in Montreal, she came straight to the courthouse, looking frazzled and exhausted from the long flight. The kids clung to her, especially Olivier, who looked more confused than scared. Seeing my children again made my heart ache. It had been months since I had last seen them, and I wanted nothing more than to scoop them up into my arms and never let them go. But this wasn't the time for emotional reunions. I had to stay focused. I sat across from Sophie in the courtroom, watching her fidget nervously. She clearly hadn't expected things to escalate to this point, but she also didn't know what was coming next. As the court proceedings began, I made a request that took everyone by surprise: a paternity test for both Olivier and Amélie. Sophie's face went pale. The tension in the room was suffocating, and for the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. She protested, saying it was unnecessary and absurd, but I insisted. The judge agreed, and the tests were ordered. A week later, the results came in. The moment I opened the envelope, my stomach twisted into knots. I read the first result. Amélie was mine. Relief washed over me. But when I opened the second page, everything inside me shattered. Olivier wasn't my son. I stared at the paper, the words blurring in front of me. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. For 8 years, I had raised this boy as my own. I had loved him, cared for him, and been there for him every step of the way. And now I was being told that he wasn't mine? I looked over at Sophie, who had tears streaming down her face. The courtroom fell silent, and I could barely hear the sound of my own breathing. I was in shock. How could this be possible? It all came out after that. Sophie confessed that she had had an affair with a man named Eric Martel, an old flame from her past. They had reconnected briefly while she and I were dating, and their fling had resulted in Olivier's conception. She had been too afraid to tell me the truth back then, and had kept it hidden all these years. Eric had no idea he had a son. Sophie had never told him, and he had gone on with his life completely unaware. My mind raced as I tried to process everything. My revenge plan had backfired spectacularly, leaving me devastated and confused. All the anger and bitterness I had felt towards Sophie was now mixed with heartbreak and loss. I had spent years loving a child who wasn't mine. But did that really change how I felt about Olivier? In the weeks that followed, I found myself in an emotional whirlwind. Sophie fled back to Sweden with Olivier and Amélie, and this time, I didn't try to stop her. I had won the legal battle, but I felt like I had lost everything. But amidst the chaos, I had one moment of clarity, a moment that changed everything. Olivier may not have been my biological son, but that didn't change the years we had spent together. I was the one who had raised him, loved him, and been there for him. Blood didn't define our bond. After much thought, I decided to fight for shared custody of both children. I wasn't going to let Sophie's betrayal rob me of the family I had built, even if things would never be the same again. Sophie and I eventually reached an agreement. She stayed in Sweden with the kids, but we arranged regular visits and video calls. Slowly, I started to rebuild my relationship with Olivier, knowing that while our connection wasn't biological, it was still real. It took time, but I began to heal. The pain of Sophie's betrayal and the shocking truth about Olivier's paternity didn't go away overnight, but I learned to live with it. My love for Amélie and Olivier remained strong, and I focused on being the best father I could be. Revenge had consumed me for months, but in Satin component placement. But in the end, it wasn't what I needed. What I needed was to find peace in the truth, no matter how painful it was. Life doesn't always go the way we expect, and sometimes the hardest truths lead us to the most important lessons. Thank you for watching this emotional roller coaster of a story. Life is full of unexpected twists, and sometimes the things we uncover aren't what we wanted to find. But through it all, we have the chance to grow stronger and move forward. If you have any questions or thoughts about this story, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. What would you have done if you were in Mark's shoes? Let us know.